She laughed at me, right there in front of clients, in a high-end restaurant with the whole team watching. "Jenna color codes everything, even her lunch," she said. And they laughed too. One of them used to be my mentee. "Hi, I'm Jenna." For years, I stayed quiet while my sister took credit for my work, at home and at the office. But the day our director raised his glass and said, "To our chairwoman, Jenna Walker," something shifted. And not just for them, for me. Before we jump into the story, if you don't mind, let me know where you're from by leaving a comment below. That way I can send a special hello your way. Now go ahead, grab yourself a warm cup of water, and find a comfy spot. It's time to begin the story. People expect betrayal to arrive with noise, an argument, a slammed door, maybe even a dramatic exit with tears and broken china. In my family, betrayal showed up quietly. It was folded into a napkin, tucked beneath the edge of a plate, and presented like a tradition. Reeve and I arrived at my parents' house just before sunset on Christmas Eve. The sky over Mercer Island was already dimming, brushed in pale gray and soft gold. A dusting of snow coated the sidewalks and sparkled beneath the porch lights. I carried a homemade pecan tart in both hands, still warm, and Reeve followed behind me with a bottle of wine wrapped in a red satin ribbon. Inside, the air was cozy. The fireplace crackled like it had been scripted. Bing Crosby crooned in the background about white Christmases, and something cinnamony simmered on the stove. Pine garlands laced the mantel and stair rail. My mother, Corinne, greeted us at the door with a kiss on the cheek and a practiced smile. She commented on my coat, not the dessert. "Set it on the sideboard, sweetheart," she said, already turning back toward the kitchen. Her earrings jingled faintly with each step. The dining table was long and beautifully arranged. As always, white plates, gold flatware, and name cards written in calligraphy. Each seat bore a leaf-shaped napkin, ones I had folded the night before at home. It was the only thing I was asked to help with this year. Elaine, of course, had picked the theme. I scanned the table once, then again. Every name card was accounted for. Tyler's was there, Elaine's fiancé. Even my cousin Jeremy, who always RSVP'd last minute, had a seat. But there wasn't one for me. I stood for a beat too long. Reeve came up beside me and saw it before I said anything. "It's probably just a mix-up," he said gently. Corinne overheard. "Oh, Jenna, don't fuss. You're family. We all know who you are." She smiled as if she'd just offered a compliment. Elaine floated over in a red velvet dress and hugged me tightly, brushing her lips against my cheek. "You look cute. So glad you could make it." Reeve pulled out a chair for me, one of the folding extras from the hall closet. I sat down at the corner of the table, next to the buffet. Dinner began with a prayer from my father, Russell, who mostly kept quiet unless prompted by food or football. Then the turkey was carved, the cranberry sauce passed, and the storytelling began. Elaine led, as usual. She spoke about a new campaign she was heading at the firm, something to do with influencer outreach. Corinne lit up. "She's a star," she said, beaming at Elaine. "We knew she had it in her since that middle school essay contest. Remember that, Russ?" Russell, mouth full of stuffing, nodded absently. You've got the Wi-Fi here, right?" I listened, smiled when appropriate, and took small bites of green bean casserole. At one point, I quietly mentioned that I'd recently been consulting with the same firm on a rebranding initiative for one of their legacy clients. It wasn't a brag, just a bridge into the conversation. Corinne didn't look up from slicing the pecan pie. "Let's let Elaine shine tonight, sweetie." The room paused just for a moment. Then it moved on. I felt Reeve's hand find mine under the table. His thumb traced small circles against my skin. I was already folding my napkin. It wasn't conscious anymore. The folding. It was muscle memory. 2 corners together, then a crease, then a gentle tuck. The napkin, a forest green one with gold trim, folded into a soft triangle in my lap. Something to do with my hands, something to focus on that wasn't the sound of my name being bypassed. After dinner, everyone migrated to the living room. Tyler told a story about trying to fix their garbage disposal. Elaine laughed so hard she snorted, and Corinne refilled her wine without asking. The fireplace glowed, wrapping the room in a golden hush. I slipped away. Outside, the snow was falling more steadily, blurring the outlines of the hedges and holiday lights. I wrapped my coat tighter and stepped onto the porch, letting the cold sting my cheeks. The quiet out here was different. It didn't erase me. It held me. A moment later, the door creaked. I didn't turn. Elaine's heels clicked softly on the wood. "I know that look," she said behind me. "You're doing that thing where you go all silent and broody, like you've just discovered a new truth." I didn't respond. Snowflakes clung to the edge of my scarf. "You always take everything so personally," she said, a little laugh in her voice. "Not everything's about you, Jenna." Still, I said nothing. But in the silence between us, I heard it clearly. Not her words, but what they carried. She believed it. Deep down, Elaine thought I had nothing to be upset about, that I should be grateful for the extra chair, the unspoken seat at the table, the invisible ink on the name card. I didn't need to reply. Not yet. Some truths don't need to be shouted to be real. Some are folded into you, one crease at a time. I wasn't looking for the org chart. I just wanted a copy of the catering invoice from last quarter. But when I clicked the wrong folder on the shared drive, there it was, clean, color-coded with a bold header that read, Q2 Leadership Structure, Walker and Company. My name wasn't just missing. It had never been there. It took me a moment to realize what I was looking at. I kept thinking it was an early draft that someone forgot to update it. But Elaine's name appeared 4 times, in bold, team lead, account strategist, client experience liaison, and event director. My name? Nowhere. Not even in fine print. It was early spring in Seattle, and the rain hadn't stopped in days. Everything outside the office window looked wet and gray, like someone had drawn the skyline in pencil and then smudged it with their thumb. I had just returned to the office after a stretch of remote work. 3 weeks ago, I'd logged out one evening to clear my head. Now, I felt like I'd come back to a stage where the play had already changed, and no one told me. Around me, the office buzzed. Standing desks hummed up and down. Whiteboards leaned against the walls, scribbled with phrases like Q2 pivot goals and emotional brand equity. Everyone was on, walking fast, talking faster. I walked past a group at the espresso machine where someone was explaining the vibe shift in TikTok ads. Elaine stood in the center of it all, wearing a butter yellow blazer and a smile like it had been tested in focus groups. I slipped into the side hallway toward the print room. Kent was there, hunched over a copier that was blinking angrily. He looked up when I entered and smiled in that apologetic way people do when they think you've caught them in the middle of something. "Hey, Jenna, back in action?" "Trying to be," I said. "Printer giving you trouble?" "Always. I think it hates me personally." He handed me the top few pages of the document he'd just printed without looking at them. "I think this one's yours," he added. I glanced down. It wasn't. It was the full team structure deck, stapled and watermarked. I raised an eyebrow. Kent's eyes widened as he realized. "Oh, shoot, I wasn't supposed to—" I gave a soft smile. "Don't worry about it." He nodded nervously and left. I stood there alone, reading it top to bottom. Elaine's name shone like a beacon. I found a few newer hires I hadn't even met yet, and again, I wasn't listed. Not as oversight, not as advisor, not as anything. It wasn't the first time I'd been erased, but something about this felt deliberate. Back at my desk, I opened my calendar. Empty. No strategy meetings, no planning sessions, a few one-on-ones that had been rescheduled or marked tentative. One had been replaced with an invite labeled Coffee Sync, E+ Julian. I closed my laptop. I found Bernard upstairs in the legal suite. He was in his usual spot, sitting behind a desk so clean it could have doubled as a product ad. He wore a gray sweater over a crisp white shirt and read documents like they told stories only he could translate. "Bernard," I said, standing just inside the doorway, Got a second? He looked up, nodded. Of course. I sat down and slid the team structure doc across the table. I wasn't looped in on this. He glanced at it, then leaned back slightly. That's the latest internal draft, yes. There's no mention of me, not even a dotted line connection. He pressed his lips together for a moment before replying. They've reframed your role. Without speaking to me? They positioned it as strategic board oversight, he said carefully. The idea was that you've outgrown day-to-day project execution. They framed it as an elevation. I didn't respond right away. The light in the room felt sharp against the metal rim of his desk lamp. Who framed it? I finally asked. He hesitated. Primarily Julian and Elaine. Right, I said quietly. Bernard sighed. Not apologetically, more like someone who's seen the same story play out before. They're assuming silence equals assent, Jenna. That's the model this place runs on. Noted, I said, standing up. I wasn't shocked, but I was done being quiet. The next day, we had a creative pitch meeting for a long-standing client. A new concept was being presented for a sustainability rollout. Elaine led the room with her usual theater, a confident tone, bright slides, a touch of self-deprecation about working late. She clicked to a section of the deck titled Behavioral Patterning Models, Phase 1 and 2. I stared at the screen. The layout, the headers, even the bullet points. They were mine. Specifically, they were lifted from a 2021 strategy framework I had built for another client, with nearly identical metrics and language. I'd archived that project 2 years ago after the rollout. No one had touched it since, and now here it was, rebranded and delivered without so much as a footnote. Elaine kept talking. The clients nodded. Julian leaned back, arms crossed, unreadable. I raised my hand slightly. Sorry, I said, keeping my voice even. Just to clarify, that model came from a report I wrote 2 years ago. I can pull it up if anyone wants to see the original source. The room went still. Elaine didn't turn her head, but I saw her jaw shift. She picked up her water glass and sipped, then set it back down. No need, she said lightly. We were all part of that timeline. It's all in the team's memory. But it wasn't. When the meeting ended, I returned to my desk. I opened Dropbox, navigated to an old folder labeled buried/proof/strategy decks. There it was, my name on the cover slide, my notes in the margins, the version that had never needed repackaging. My mouse hovered over Download All. There's a quiet kind of reckoning that happens when you stop asking for credit and start gathering evidence. It's not about vengeance. It's about clarity. And I was finally ready to see clearly. Some laughs cut deeper than insults. They wrap themselves in politeness, bounce around a room like tennis balls, and land in places you didn't know were bruised. The worst ones don't come from enemies. They come from people who once looked up to you. We were seated at a round table near the window at Canlis, a high-end restaurant overlooking Lake Union. It was one of those perfectly Seattle days, gray and elegant. Rain clouds hung just high enough not to interrupt anything, but low enough to tint the world in silver. A jazz pianist played softly near the back. The linen napkins were folded like swans. There were 6 of us, Elaine and me, 2 clients, Julian Carter, and a junior associate named Mara I had mentored 3 years ago. She had since moved apartments, but she still gave me warm nods in hallways. Until today. The waiter poured cucumber water into crystal glasses, and the conversation buzzed like it always did in these lunches. Controlled, mildly flattering, never too deep. I had prepped a week for this presentation. I spoke first, outlining market trends, and predicted movement across the client's eco-retail sector. My notes were tight, graphs clear, slides minimal. I spoke steadily, referencing both competitor analysis and internal audit metrics. I could feel Julian's gaze on me, not judging, not pressing, just present. Then Elaine leaned forward with a light laugh and said, "She's our secret weapon. Jenna color codes everything, her spreadsheets, her calendar, even her lunch containers." The clients chuckled. One, a man in a blue tie, added, "That's dedication." More polite laughter followed. Then Mara laughed too, a full laugh. One of those sudden, sharp exhales that lingers even after it stops. I didn't say anything. I just sat with my hands folded in my lap, my mouth neutral, eyes on the centerpiece. A small bouquet of cream-colored tulips. Julian didn't laugh. He didn't speak either. He just looked up from his bread plate, then back at me as if waiting for something. I gave him nothing. My face stayed calm. They moved on to dessert orders. I quietly excused myself and slipped away before the soufflé could arrive. Outside, the drizzle had turned to mist. The valet stand was quiet, just a teenager under a black umbrella scrolling through his phone. I stood beneath the overhang, my coat unbuttoned, arms crossed. I could still hear the laughter ringing in the back of my ears, not because it was loud, but because it had been so easy for them. It reminded me of 2008. Elaine and I had entered a student entrepreneurship competition. We pitched a recycled fabric line. I wrote the business plan. She gave the presentation. We won. During the award ceremony, when our names were called, my mother handed me the camera. "Get a good angle of your sister," she whispered. I did. I took the photo. Elaine still has it framed in her old bedroom. My name wasn't in the caption. The restaurant door swung open behind me. I turned, expecting maybe a client or the valet. It was Julian. He stepped beside me, shrugging on his charcoal coat, letting the collar settle. He didn't speak right away. Just stood, watching the rain blur the pavement like watercolor. Then quietly, he said, "They'll know soon." I glanced at him. "Know what?" He met my eyes. "Who you are?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. It was the first time in a long while that someone said something about me without expecting a reaction, and somehow that felt more real than applause. I got home before Reeve. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet I used to fear. I hung up my coat, kicked off my shoes, and walked straight to my desk. I pulled open the drawer. There it was, the napkin, green, gold-trimmed, folded into a perfect maple leaf, the one from Christmas dinner, the one I folded while Corinne talked about Elaine's essay contest from 7th grade, as if it had happened yesterday. I picked it up, turned it once in my hand. This time, I didn't unfold it. I didn't need to. Some things are no longer habits, they're history. And some days, the silence you keep is not a sign of weakness, but of choosing not to give them your voice for free. Elaine spent her days chasing spotlight. She walked faster than others in the hallway, spoke louder in meetings, laughed the hardest at jokes she didn't tell. But while she raced to be noticed, I'd already built the seat she was trying so desperately to sit in. I returned to the office in early March, officially this time. No more hybrid status or quiet opt-outs. The fog that morning clung to the edges of the city like a memory that hadn't cleared. Walker & Company's building stood as glassy and sharp as ever. Minimalist lobby, echoing footsteps, the scent of overbrewed coffee and cold air clinging to scarves. The receptionists offered small nods as I walked past. Kent, seated just inside HR, stood when he saw me. "Welcome back, Ms. Walker," he said, just slightly too formal. I gave him a nod and kept walking. My office was still there, clean, untouched. A soft hum buzzed from the soundproof glass panel beside the door. I placed my coat on the back of the chair and set my bag down. For a long moment, I just stood, breathing. At 10:30, I joined the weekly strategy sync. Elaine was already there, flipping through a deck with the kind of energy reserved for people who've convinced themselves they're the hero of every story. "Client retention is our priority this quarter," she said. "I've drafted a new model for touchpoint monitoring, something proactive. I'd like the team to pilot it next week." Bernard, seated near the end of the table, tapped his pen twice against his notepad. "Let's hold implementation until Ms. Walker reviews the framework." Elaine blinked. "Of course," she said, her tone smooth. "I assumed I'd be the one reviewing it." Bernard didn't clarify, just looked at me. Elaine didn't ask. She rarely did when she thought she already had the answer. Later that afternoon, Kent forwarded me a chain of emails. I opened them without emotion. The subject line, Client Renewal Proposal. Elaine W. inside, a paragraph nearly word for word from a report I'd written last year. The same metrics, the same phrasing, not even rearranged. She had swapped the title and added her signature. I didn't reply. Instead, I closed the email, walked to the rooftop lounge, and sat by the edge with my tea. The city below looked soft and still. The fog didn't lift, but it didn't press either. Julian appeared 5 minutes later, quiet as usual, his coat draped over one arm. "There's a dinner Thursday," he said, sliding into the seat beside me. I nodded. "No speeches, I hope," I said. He smiled faintly. "Just a moment of recognition." The day of the stakeholder dinner arrived with wind and cold. I wore a navy pantsuit, plain blouse, low heels, no earrings, no watch, my hair in a low knot. I looked exactly like someone people forgot to introduce until they didn't. The venue was all warm lighting and soft string music. White wine glasses caught reflections from the candles. Everyone mingled with practiced ease. I stood near the back until Julian waved me over. He raised his glass without preamble, without a microphone. "Before we finish tonight," he said, "I want to acknowledge the person whose long-term vision, calm leadership, and structural foresight brought Walker and Company to its current momentum." Forks clinked against plates. Chairs shifted slightly. Julian continued, "Please raise a glass for our chairwoman, Jenna Walker." The air shifted. For just a breath, the room didn't know what to do. Elaine, seated 2 tables away, stared straight ahead. Her champagne flute paused mid-air. I could see the ripple move across her shoulders. Recognition dressed as disbelief. I raised my own glass not too high and smiled. There was no applause, only stillness, which in some rooms is louder than noise. After dessert, I retrieved my coat and made my way toward the exit. As I passed Elaine's table, I paused for half a second. She looked up, eyes searching, voice stuck somewhere behind her lips. I leaned slightly and said, "We'll talk strategy first thing tomorrow." Outside, the wind had picked up. I wrapped the coat around my shoulders, feeling the weight settle differently this time. Not like armor, more like confirmation. That night, in my apartment, I opened my planner. I flipped to Friday and wrote one word in bold red ink. First time I'd ever used that color. Lead. Because sometimes, the title isn't what grants you the power. It's what finally forces everyone else to see the seat you already designed for yourself. Elaine always said she wanted to leave something behind. A legacy, she called it. But legacies aren't inherited like jewelry or a lake house. They're built in silence, one quiet sacrifice at a time. And not everyone notices who paid the cost. It was Mother's Day, 2023. I arrived late and alone. Corinne's garden was in full bloom, just the way she liked it. Roses trained along the trellis, trimmed hydrangeas framing the lawn like a floral border. White tablecloths flapped gently in the May breeze. A jazzy playlist floated from the Bluetooth speaker on the porch. I recognized the tune, Norah Jones, Don't Know Why. It was always Corinne's go-to for occasions that called for softness. Elaine spotted me from the drink station. She wore blush pink and wedge sandals, her hair curled just enough to look effortless. She had gift bags lined up beside her feet, monogrammed, tied with ribbon. "You made it," she said, voice syrupy. I nodded. "Nice weather." She laughed lightly, scanning me head to toe. I hadn't worn anything special. Black pants, a white blouse, flats. I carried no gifts. Just my keys and my silence. Reeve had offered to come. I told him no. Brunch was already underway. Corinne stood at the center of the table, a crystal flute in her hand. "I just want to say how proud I am," she began, "of both my girls, different strengths, but equally wonderful." She looked at Elaine, then at me, her smile a little too bright. "It's a joy watching you shine in such different ways." I raised my glass politely, but didn't speak. Elaine leaned in. "Mom's thinking of writing something, an essay or a blog maybe, on raising daughters with strong voices. For her women's group. I didn't react. The shrimp quiche was decent. The cucumber sandwich was limp. Elaine, undeterred, cleared her throat. Actually, I've been meaning to bring this up. I've been talking with some partners about a co-led campaign. With you, Jenna. Something that shows how sisters can come together. Healing through collaboration. Several heads turned toward me. Even Russell, who had been quietly chewing his way through a third mini cheesecake, looked up. I set my fork down. The company's doing fine, I said evenly. We don't need a campaign. The silence that followed wasn't harsh. It was worse. It was polite. Elaine smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Of course. Just a thought. I sipped my water. No further comment. Later, while others hovered around the dessert tray, Corinne found me in the kitchen. The garden buzzed behind her through the open window. Bees and cousins and compliments blending into one soft hum. She shut the door behind her and leaned against the counter. Her voice was gentler than I expected. "What will it take to fix this?" she asked. I turned from the window and looked at her. "Nothing," I said. "It was never broken." She tilted her head slightly, waiting. "Just misnamed," I added. She looked down at the counter. There was a plate of strawberries she'd arranged earlier, each one carefully sliced and fanned. "You're always so literal," she murmured. "No," I said quietly. "You're just used to being misunderstood as profound." She exhaled through her nose, then turned to busy her hands with the pitcher of iced tea, though no one had asked for more. "I did my best," she said finally. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move. For her, yes. She froze. I stepped past her, gently placing my empty plate in the sink. "You forgot you had another daughter." When I returned to the garden, everything was back in place. The soft clinking of glasses, the murmur of praise. Elaine stood near the porch, smiling through a conversation I didn't need to hear. Her shoulders were squared, but her eyes darted toward me, just for a second. I picked up my bag, nodded once to Reeves' cousin, who looked relieved to be interrupted, and walked toward the gate. As I passed the table, my hand paused over the white cloth. The napkin I had used was still folded neatly beside my plate. I unfolded it, smoothed it flat with both hands, and placed it in the center of the plate, open, uncreased, honest. From the corner of my eye, I saw Elaine watching. The hydrangeas fluttered in the breeze, and something small, maybe inside her, maybe in that carefully curated garden, began to come loose. The title didn't change me. It didn't rewrite the years of showing up without being seen, or the dinners where my name sat unspoken like flatware no one used. But it did one thing I never expected. It made it impossible for them to keep pretending I wasn't there. Spring arrived gently that year, the kind of soft, fragrant season that made the air smell like renewal. Outside the Walker and Company building, the lilacs bloomed in thick clusters along the walkway. I noticed them for the first time in a while. Inside, the town hall was standing room only. Employees from every department filled the bright, high-ceilinged space. The backdrop was minimal. Soft blue lighting, a logo projected behind the podium, and the faint hum of anticipation. I stepped up when Julian gestured. The mic was already adjusted to my height. I didn't bring notes. "Sometimes," I said, "the quiet ones are the ones who carried it all." You just never looked. No dramatic pause, no tagline. But the room stilled, and then a soft applause began. Slow, steady, not thunderous. Real. I nodded once and stepped down. Later that evening, a group of us gathered at my condo. Reeve had set the table himself. Charcuterie, olives, small bowls of roasted almonds. He poured sparkling water into champagne flutes, smiling as he handed me mine. "To doing things quietly," he said. Bernard raised his glass, and with precision. Kent handed me a small, wrapped package, just something you might appreciate. I opened it gently. Inside was a book, Invisible Women. The spine worn in all the right places, a few pages marked with post-its. Kent smiled, a little awkward. "I know it's a bit on the nose," he said. I touched the cover. "It's perfect." Then Bernard stepped forward and placed a small rectangular box in front of me. Black mat, hinged. Inside, nested in cream velvet, was a napkin, a green one, folded into a perfect maple leaf, framed under glass. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. But I smiled, and that was enough. Later, after everyone had left and Reeve had gone to bed, I walked through the living room, turning off lights. The lemon basil candle flickered near the bookshelf, casting a warm circle against the wall. On my desk, I noticed something new, a plain envelope, no name, just resting beside my laptop like it belonged there. I picked it up, opened it slowly. Inside was one thing, a napkin, folded into a maple leaf. No note, no explanation. I stared at it for a long time. Then I walked over to my filing cabinet, opened the top drawer, and placed the napkin inside. Unfolded? Number? Unexplained? Yes, but understood in a way that needed no further words. I closed the drawer gently. Some silences echo louder than applause. Some silences aren't meant to be filled. They're meant to be honored. I didn't need a title to find my worth. I just needed to stop explaining it to people who never intended to understand. In families, it's easy to mistake noise for love and recognition for legacy. But sometimes, the deepest strength comes not from being seen, but from seeing yourself clearly, even when others refuse to look. In life, the truth doesn't always speak loudly, but it never disappears. If this story stirred something in you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Whether whispered or written out loud, your voice matters more than you know.